So you mentioned slavery. That's something that is common throughout human history. What do we know about their relationship with slavery?
Well, Roman slavery, a couple just reminders at the beginning. First of all, it's not racial slavery. So for people, in the United States, you tend to think of slavery through this kind of racial lens. So slaves in ancient Roman society could be any color, ethnicity, gender, origin, whatever. It's an economic status. Now, having said that, slavery is fundamentally horrific to human dignity because it is defining a human being as an object. And very famously, a Roman agricultural writer who's writing about farms, just as a kind of aside, says, on your farm, you have three types of tools. You have dumb tools, and by dumb he means can't speak. So that's like shovels, picks, things like this, wagons. You have semi-articulate tools, which are animals, and you have articulate tools, which are human beings, slaves. And for him, these are all just categories of tools. It's so intensely dehumanizing to view people in that way. Mm-hmm. So Roman slavery is odd in that it doesn't have this racial component. It's horrible in the way all slavery is horrible. But the other thing about it is it's not a hard line. It's a permeable membrane, and many people move back and forth across it. So you have many people in the Roman world who were born a slave who gained their freedom through one means or another. And you have many others who were born free and become slaves. And you have some who go back and forth. There's a great Roman tombstone of this guy who says, I was born a free man in Parthia, I was enslaved, then I gained my freedom and I became a teacher or something, and I had a life, and now I'm a Roman citizen. So it's this whole back and forth across all these boundaries multiple times.
Oh, so there's probably a process, like an economic transaction.
The most common source of slaves in the Roman world was war. So wherever the Roman army went, in its wake would be literally a train of slave traders. So you're in war, you capture an enemy city, you whack the people over the head, and you turn around if you're a soldier and you sell them to one of these slave traders that's following the army around, literally. So that's probably the biggest source of slaves. Another big source is just children of slaves or slaves. And some people could literally sell either themselves or their children into slavery due to economic, necessity or privation or something. So as terrible as that sounds, a father could sell a child if he needed money. Once you were a slave, though, the experience of slavery varied a lot because a lot of the slaves were agricultural slaves. So they would work sort of like in the American South, big plantations. They might be chained. They were probably abused. That's very similar to slavery as we think of it in, let's say the Caribbean, South America, or the United States prior to the Civil War, that kind of slavery. But a lot of Roman slaves were also some of the more skilled people. And this seems a little weird. So if you're a rich person, you have slaves, it's actually a good investment for you to train your slaves in a profession. So a lot of Roman doctors, scribes, accountants, sort of, all this sort of thing, barbers were slaves. Because if you train this person and then they produce a lot of money for you, you get that money. And those slaves would sometimes be given an incentive to work hard where they could, and this is just sort of an agreement between the master and the slave, if they earned a certain amount of money, X amount of money, they could then buy their own freedom from the master. So this was your incentive to work harder. If you were trained, let's say, as a doctor, I work really hard, I can buy myself out of slavery. Or a lot of masters would free their slaves in their wills. So when they died, they would say, I manumit this slave and that slave. So it was a weird institution in that elements were just as horrible as what we think of as slavery and just as exploitative. And like I say, the overall notion of slavery is intensely dehumanizing. But yet there was this wide range of types of slaves. And the odd thing is, in the city of Rome, many of the worst jobs, so if you're, just a laborer hauling crap around, at the docks or, things like that, you might well be a free person and a slave would hold a skilled job. And that seems a little strange or counterintuitive to us, but you see how in the Roman economy it sort of works.
And that could be one of the things that would be surprising to us coming from the modern day, to the ancient world is just the number of slaves. So you mentioned one of the things we don't think about is that most of the people are farmers.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is just the number of slaves.
And there's a big debate. How many slaves were there? What percentage of the populace, let's say in the city of Rome, were slaves? And this is something historians like to argue about a lot. And we keep coming back to this theme of, sometimes it's the little things that illustrate stuff well. And for slaves, the one that always gets me is some slaves, and these would be sort of the more abused slaves, they would literally put little bronze collars on them with a tag that said, hi, my name is Felix. I'm the slave of so-and-so. I've run away. If you catch me, return me to the temple of so-and-so and you'll get a reward. So it's a dog tag, right? Except this is a human being. And you can see these in museums. I mean, you can go to a museum today and see this little bronze collar with a tag on it that's talking about a human being as if they're this kind of animal that's run away. And this is very telling too. We're talking about Roman law. Under Roman law, technically, when a slave runs away, the crime that he's committing is theft because he's stolen himself from his master. So again, it's this very dehumanizing view of it.
And just a reminder to people in America thinking about this, we have a certain view and picture to what slavery is. A reminder that all of human history, most of human history has had slaves of all colors, of all religions. That's within us to select a group of people, call them the other, use them as objects, abuse them. And I would say, as a person who believes the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man, all of us, every person listening to this is capable of being owner of a slave if they're put in the position of capable of hating the other, of forming the other, of othering other people. And we should be very careful not to look ourselves in the mirror and remind ourselves that we're human. It's easy to kind of think, okay, well, there's these slaves and slave owners through history, and I would have never been one of those. But just like as we would be farmers, we could be both. If we went back into history, we could be both slaves and slave owners, and all of those are humans.
I mean, just to build on that, I'd say the othering of others is a morally corrosive thing to do.
Yeah.